So I am Rafael Mesa. I'm coordinating PI of the Cancer Intervention and Surveillance Modeling Network, CISNET Lung Group. Our research team has extensive collective experience in comparing modeling of smoking and lung cancer interventions. I am joined today by several others on the line who are also from CISNET, including Ted Hofer from Yale, and we might also have David Levy from Georgetown joining us. Today's webinar will be led by Jamie Tam, a junior investigator and doctoral student trainee with our group, and who has been leading the development of the TCP tool. And so, Jamie.
Oh, thanks. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've invited you here as representatives from your offices because we want to make sure you're aware of this tool and how it might be useful to you and your colleagues. We've been developing this website for more than 2 years, and we're launching the website publicly this month. And as part of that wider release, I think in 2 weeks we'll be organizing a public webinar through NCI's Research to Realities webinar series, and we hope that after today's session, you can help us disseminate information about the tool and about that public webinar through your network when the time comes. So first, some background on who we are. As Rafael mentioned, we are the Cancer Intervention and Surveillance Modeling Network, the CISNET Lung Group, and that is a consortium of NCI-sponsored investigators who use modeling to improve our understanding of lung cancer control interventions and their effects on population health. CISNET models can be used to guide public health research and priorities, and they help to identify optimal cancer control strategies. Our goal with this new tool is to try to bridge the gap between research and policy making. The development of the TCP tool was a team effort, and our partners in development include Cornerstone Systems Northwest and Scott Gilkison, who specializes in usability testing of websites. Now, you may already be familiar with population models of smoking that have been used to guide public health decision-making, including the Mendes-Warner model, which projects future U.S. smoking prevalence, David Levy's SIM-Smoke models, which have been used in numerous states and countries, and also the CISNET models. CISNET models have been used to estimate the number of premature deaths avoided due to tobacco control since the 1964 Surgeon General's report. They've also been used to assess the implications of raising the minimum purchase age of tobacco products in the recent ION report. So these types of computational models can be useful, but they're rarely made accessible outside of the research community. And policy folks, public health professionals, advocacy groups, and members of the general public might also be interested in estimates of the impact of tobacco control policies on health. So our group's objective with this TCP tool was to develop a public website that allows anyone to interactively examine the potential impact of tobacco control policies on smoking and population health in the U.S. Our target audience for the TCP tool includes people at different levels of familiarity with tobacco issues and different levels of familiarity with models of smoking. It also includes people who are working on policy issues at different levels, the federal, state, or local. So we were trying to develop a tool that in a way that would make it accessible to everyone. And that work of translating a model for policy, advocacy, and general public audiences and making sure that the tool is accessible and useful for all these different groups was part of our challenge. Before we show you the TCP tool itself, we'd like to tell you more about the process that was used to develop it. Now first, we modeled the effects of specific tobacco control policies. The results of these simulations were then integrated into an interactive interface that allows the user to specify their own proposed policy conditions and explore the estimated effects of that policy on population health. We then conducted usability testing with experts in tobacco control to improve the interface and ensure that it was responsive to the needs of our users. And we refined the website in response to that feedback. This process was repeated multiple times until we achieved a version of the TCP tool that addressed many of the major issues that might have come up. So the first step, doing the modeling itself. The CISNET lung models are all based on the smoking history generator, which is a micro-simulation model that simulates each individual's life and smoking history. So given someone's year of birth and their gender, the smoking history generator simulates their probability of smoking initiation, cessation, and death in a given year as their age. And these probabilities were calibrated to data from the National Health Interview Survey from 1965 through 2015. And their probability of death each year also depends on age, gender, year of birth, and of course, their smoking status. And after we simulate an entire population, we're able to aggregate the data to estimate population deaths and population smoking prevalence. So this figure here shows the CISNET annual probabilities of smoking initiation for males and females as used in the smoking history generator and also as reported in the Surgeon General's report. So on the x-axis you see age here, and then on the y-axis here is the initiation probability, and all of these different lines are for different birth cohorts. So you can see as in general that as individuals age and approach adolescence, the probability of smoking initiation goes up and then drops once you get to roughly 30 onwards. So the probability of initiating smoking beyond that age is pretty small, and eventually goes to 0. You can also see that for more recent birth cohorts for both males and females, so let's take a look at the 1980 birth cohort, this gray line here, initiation probabilities in general are dramatically lower than for older birth cohorts as well. So these probabilities are used for each individual simulated by the smoking history generator. And as one example of an individual smoking and life history, this person was born in 1910 and didn't start smoking until they were a teenager, continued to smoke, and then quit in their mid 50s, and then their death was simulated in their late 60s. And here's another example down here of somebody who died while they were still smoking and had not quit. So those are just a couple of examples of individuals who are being simulated in the model. Now, when you accumulate all of these individual smoking histories, the data can be aggregated to represent the U.S. smoking experience. So the smoking history generator can generate outputs like adult smoking prevalence and make projections under the status quo, assuming no changes through policies. So these projections here are based on keeping initiation and cessation probabilities for the most recent birth cohorts constant going forward. And the dots here represent data from the National Health IMU surveys, and the solid lines represent projections from the smoking history generator. And you can see that the model shows a pretty close correspondence with actual survey data. So where do these policies fit in? We developed a policy module that modifies the smoking history generator. And the way the module works is that it modifies those initiation and cessation probabilities that are used by the smoking history generator. This allows the model to simulate individual smoking histories under a scenario where the probability of smoking initiation decreases and the probability of smoking cessation increases. So to evaluate the impact of a specific policy, we need to determine the appropriate modifiers, and we need to vary those modifiers according to each individual's age, when the simulated policy would go into effect, how long it's been since that policy was put into place, and of course the baseline policy environment. We won't go into too much technical detail about the methods today because of time, but we can try to answer any questions towards the end, and we can direct you to more technical information if you'd like to look that over after the webinar. So for the TCP tool, we modeled 4 different tobacco control policies. The first policy, raising cigarette taxes, is also the tobacco control policy with the strongest evidence base. Research has shown this to be a highly effective intervention, and it's an attractive policy option for decision makers because raising taxes generates state and local revenue. The second policy we modeled was enforcing and expanding clean air laws or smoke-free air laws. These are also shown to be strong and effective tobacco control interventions. They also come at almost no cost to states. And depending on where you are in the US, some states have greater smoke-free air law coverage than others. The third policy we considered was increasing the level of tobacco control program expenditures, which we refer to as TC expenditures. Now, while there's limited evidence on the impact of expenditures per se, we do know that well-funded, comprehensive, and coordinated programs funded by these dollars are effective. And these coordinated programs can include cessation programs, media campaigns, surveillance and evaluation, or other initiatives that happen through schools. And of the policies we model, this is the only one that would entail substantial cost to states. The CDC has issued its recommendations regarding the level of expenditures that each state should invest in tobacco control programming, and currently very few states meet those CDC best practices. The fourth policy we considered is raising the minimum age of legal access to tobacco. This is a policy option that is being increasingly considered at both the local and state levels, and it's an attractive policy option to decision makers given that it involves no cost. And while there's evidence on the effectiveness of things like raising the legal drinking age and other analogous interventions, the evidence base for raising the minimum age of legal access for tobacco isn't that substantial. So when we're modifying the smoking history generator to align with the existing literature on policy effects wherever the evidence is limited, we relied on expert opinions. I should note also that we don't actually model costs, but we do make note of the fact that the costs of interventions are also considered by decision makers. Now I'll describe how we parameterize each of the policies for the model and outline some of the key modeling assumptions, starting with cigarette taxes. So for taxes, the model requires two pieces of information from the user. The first is the initial price per pack of cigarettes in that state or region, ranging from $4 to $10.50. The second is the amount of the tax increase, ranging from $1 to $5. These provide us with the percent change in price. And we assume that whatever the tax increase is, that amount gets passed on directly to the consumer in the form of an increased price per pack of cigarettes. So a tax increase of $1 translates to into a $1 increase in the price per pack of cigarettes for the consumer. We assume that the impact that it has on smoking initiation continues going forward and stays constant, whereas the effects of the tax increase on quitting decays over time, because those who are inclined to quit smoking in response to the tax increase will have already done so in the earlier years or the first few years after the policy's been implemented. We know from the literature that the effect of a policy differs depending on someone's age. Evidence shows that younger individuals are more responsive to price changes, so we assume higher price elasticities for younger ages, such that for a 10% increase in price, you get initiation rates that are reduced by 4% for those ages 10 to 17 and so on here, and we assume no impact on initiation past the age of 35. The model estimates that a 10% increase in price translates into a 20% increase in smoking cessation probabilities for individuals at all ages. And these values were selected to conform with literature on the effects of cigarette taxes on smoking prevalence. The price elasticity represents the percent change in smoking relative to the percent change in price. And so the initiation and cessation modifiers that are used in the model depend on these elasticities. We also assume that there's a constant percent change in the initiation and cessation probability for a given percent change in price. And whatever the percent change in price, there's a corresponding percent change in probabilities that is applied using the elasticity shown in the table here. And doing this allows us to obtain the appropriate initiation and cessation modifiers for our policy. Note that we don't account for tax avoidance, which is common for populations near state borders, and we also don't account for inflation. But if enough time has passed by, inflation can actually erode the impact of a tax increase. So we assume that the impact of the tax increase is sustained. Next, we modeled smoke-free air laws. Smoke-free air laws cover three types of indoor venues: restaurants, bars, and workplaces. And for this policy, the user has to provide us with information about the existing smoke-free air law environment in their state or region. And we also need to know, under the baseline scenario, the percent of the population covered by smoking bans in these types of venues. Then we also need the user to provide us with information about what kind of smoke-free air law they're proposing to implement. So a comprehensive law would cover all three venues, but other laws that they're considering might prohibit smoking in workplaces and restaurants, but not bars. We model the greatest impact of smoke-free air laws in workplaces, followed by restaurants and then by bars. Again, we assume that the impact of these laws on smoking initiation stays constant going forward, but that their impact on quitting declines over time as those who quit do so in the years immediately following policy implementation. And since the retired population is less affected by smoking bans in workplaces, the model was calibrated to reduce their smoking by less than for those who are of working age. Our estimates for smoke-free air laws are conservative because the model doesn't account for health benefits due to reduced secondhand smoke exposure. So we only model the impact of a policy on individual smoking behavior. The third policy we modeled increases the level of investment in tobacco control programs as a percent of CDC recommendations. The information we need from users is first the initial level of investment as a percent of those CDC recommendations, and then the policy level of expenditures going all the way up to 100% of CDC recommendations. For the policy being simulated, we assume that the proposed level of funding is maintained each year, and again, only the quitting rates decay over time while the impact on initiation stays constant. We also assume increasing and then decreasing returns on that investment as the level of funding goes from 0% of CDC recommendations all the way up to 100%. So the shape of this curve, which starts out slow, gets steeper, and then flattens out at the top. That shape has been used in a previous model evaluating the effects of media campaigns on smoking, and mass media campaigns we know are a major component of state tobacco control programs. This is because tobacco control programs probably won't be very effective at extremely low levels of funding, and also once you exceed a certain level of funding, the return on that investment at higher levels of expenditures is smaller. So here we show that the model estimates that at most, going from 0% to 100% of CDC recommendations increases cessation by 12.5% and decreases initiation probabilities by 10%. Our fourth policy, raising the minimum age of legal access, has become a more widely discussed policy intervention, especially at the state and local levels. And since now some states and localities have already raised the minimum age, I think 5 states now, California, Oregon, Hawaii, New Jersey, and Maine, I think, have already raised the MLA, and in Massachusetts, many localities have raised the minimum age. When we're considering this policy, we need to take into account the existing environment, that is the percent of the population that's already covered by MLA laws at either the local or state level. So the effects of raising the minimum age to 19 are applied and scaled down based on the percent of the population already covered by minimum age laws at 19 or 21 in that state or region. Some individual states have 19 as the minimum age rather than 18, so we take that into account, since the impact of going from 19 to 21 is different than going from 18 to 21. The second piece of information we need is the age at which the user would like to set the minimum, the MLA. And we use the same ages proposed in the IOM report, so that is 19, 21, or 25. This policy assumes no impact on cessation whatsoever, which means that any changes to population smoking are going to take longer to realize. You're only having an impact on young people smoking initiation, so it's going to take a lot longer for you to see that translate into health gains at the population level. So for this particular policy, we simulate results going out all the way to 2100, whereas for the other policies, we simulate going out to 2060. We also assume that policies at the local level are unaffected by policies implemented at the state level unless the state policy is more progressive. So if a locality has an existing policy where the minimum age is 19, then when the state decides to raise their minimum age to 21, that will have an impact on that locality. Because this is a newer intervention, there's less real-world evidence on the impact of raising the MLA, so we use the estimated effect sizes that were developed by the IOM committee. The table here is taken directly from the IOM report, and where you can see where the estimated effects of raising the minimum ages to 19, 21, and 25 are organized here by age group. And you can see that the effects are larger when the MLA is raised to older ages, and you can also see from these estimates that minimum age policies have an impact on those who are under the minimum age as well. This is because younger kids lose their access to cigarettes through their social networks when the minimum age goes up. To make the website interactive and ensure that the results are displayed quickly, we actually ran all of our simulations in advance. And we did this for every combination of policy parameters. So this way, when the user visits the site, they don't have to click run and then wait hours for the results to be generated. Instead, the results for their choice of parameters will automatically display. There are more than 2,200 possible policy scenarios in the TCP tool, and for each of them, we simulated 30 million people and aggregated the data to deliver population estimates that correspond to each state or region. And the TCP tool provides three main population health outcomes. Smoking prevalence projections are available by gender, age group, and even birth cohort, and we include charts for the number of deaths avoided and the number of life years gained in the policy scenario. When the user arrives at the TCP tool, they can select either a state or an average across all states. And once a region is chosen, the interface pre-populates with existing data on the level of policy coverage for that state. For example, most people won't know off the top of their head that more than half of the population of Massachusetts is covered by Tobacco 21 laws at the local and county levels. So what we did was we went ahead and gathered the latest information from various sources for each of the policies, so that a user doesn't need to look up that information themselves when they're choosing their policy scenario. I mentioned earlier that the smoking history generator is calibrated to the National Health Interview Survey, which is of course nationally representative. So we took these national level outputs from the model and we directly scaled that to the population sizes and the smoking prevalence for each US state and Washington, D.C. in the year 2015. At the moment, the smoking history generator doesn't simulate differences by geographic region, and it doesn't account for different demographic compositions across states. This is something we hope to refine in the future, but for the time being, the TCP tool does offer reasonable estimates for each of the 50 states and D.C. So now let's go directly to the TCP tool and check it out online. Here we go. So now let's go directly to the TCP tool and check it out online. Here we are on the main page. Welcome to the Tobacco Control Policy tool, and we have each of our 4 different policies, and we can go ahead and check out cigarette taxes first. So when you get to the cigarette taxes, there are 3 major things happening on the page. On the right here, over here is a map. Here are the policy parameters, and then these are the outputs. And we can go through these step by step on this guided tour. So this is a chloropleth map, and the colors in the map represent the price per pack. So lighter colors represent states with higher prices per pack of cigarettes, and then the darker colors represent states with very low prices per pack of cigarettes. You can hover over the state to get more information about that, and you can click on that if that's the state or region you want to simulate your policy for. For us, we'll just stick to the United States, so that's our region that we'll consider today. Here, of course, New York as an example. Because the price is so high already for a pack of cigarettes, states like New York have the least to gain, whereas states with very low prices per pack of cigarettes have the most to gain from a tax increase. Next, we choose the policy year. So by default, it simulates the policy starting in the year 2017. And then these are our policy parameters. So the initial price here is set to $6, and that's because the price per pack of cigarettes in the US is on average $6.16. So that's already set for us, but we can change the proposed increase here by going through the drop-down menu. For this case, we'll just propose a $1 tax increase for the US. Here's a summary of the policy that we're simulating in the TCP tool. What if we raise the tax by $1 in the year 2017, effectively raising the price per pack to roughly $7 per pack? And then down here are the results for that proposed policy that you're simulating, and you can click on each one to find out more. We'll start here with smoking prevalence. So this is smoking prevalence for all adults ages 18 to 99. The initial price is $6, tax increase is $1. The solid lines represent our baseline policy, and the dotted lines are our proposed policy. Or sorry, not baseline policy, your baseline scenario, and then your policy scenario. And as you hover over the chart, you get detailed year-to-year information about the reduction in smoking prevalence for males and females. And then over on the right-hand side, it updates with a bar chart and information about what the prevalence reduction will look like by the year 2040 or the year 2060. You can also look at this by age group. So here we are looking at ages 18 to 24, and you get the same information for males and females with detailed information for each year. We can also look at things by cohort. So you can look at smoking prevalence for more recent birth cohort. So this is the 2010 birth cohort, and then for earlier birth cohorts, people born in the year 1970. And we have charts on the right that update with information. You may also be interested in looking at the prevalence reduction rather than smoking prevalence itself. So you can look at the percentage point reduction for males and females each year as well. So that's smoking prevalence outputs. Let's take a look at deaths avoided. We get the same information at the top, the summary of our policy, and then as you hover, you get information on the estimated number of deaths avoided. So here, for the United States, an estimated 238,000 deaths would be avoided if we simulate a tax increase of $1. Instead of closing this window, you can also click life years gained on this tab here and get the total number of life years gained for the US population with that tax increase going through to 2060. And you get year-to-year information as you hover over the chart as well. So that's cigarette taxes. Let's quickly look at the other policies. Smoke-free air laws here. Now let's just choose a state like Wyoming. In the state of Wyoming, 56% of workers report being in smoke-free workplaces, but they don't have, there are laws at the local or county level that prohibit smoking in restaurants and bars, but only 32% of the population or 28% of the population is covered by those. So let's choose Wyoming for now. And once you click that, it sets the initial values for the level of existing smoke-free air law coverage, and then you can, in your proposed policy, you may be interested in increasing the smoke-free air law coverage in workplaces all the way to 100%, and maybe your policy doesn't include bars. You could change that here. And then you have, again, this policy summary down here, and note again the results are conservative because they don't include the benefits of reduced secondhand smoke exposure. And you can click through each of these different charts again. If a user wants to find out more, they can click read more and find out and get a little bit more background on smoke-free air laws and the references that we cite. They can also, if they're confused about any of the parameters, hover over these question marks to get more information about what that parameter means. There's also this quick getting started tool if you don't want to go through the entire guided tour. Let's go to tobacco control expenditures, and let's choose another state, the state of Texas, which is only at 7% of the CDC funding recommendations, and we're proposing a policy that raises the level of tobacco control in expenditures all the way up to 100%. We get the summary here, and then the three outputs once more. And here we can take a look at minimum age. So again, we can choose a state like Texas, where the existing level of coverage of MLA 19 and 21 laws are 0, and we want to see what the impact is of raising the minimum age up to 19, 21, or 25. If you click on a state like New York, New York already has some localities with tobacco 21 laws, and roughly 50% of the state is covered by minimum age laws at 21. And so that's so when you click the state of New York, the initial values pre-populate here, and all you have to do is choose the proposed minimum age that you want to simulate. So the version of the TCP tool that you've seen has been through many changes in response to feedback from experts in state and federal government, researchers in epidemiology, economics, and public health, and individuals working at NGOs that are engaged in tobacco control work. Scott Gilkison led each round of usability testing where one-on-one remote sessions were conducted. And by watching individuals test out earlier versions of the website, we were able to identify areas of confusion and make improvements. During these sessions, we recorded how users were interacting with the site, and throughout the individual was able to ask questions, describe anything that was unexpected or confusing, and by watching them use the interface, we could also see where users were lingering or having trouble figuring out how to use the tool. That allowed us to refine the site and make it more intuitive. After each session, we asked them probing questions to find out where they felt confused. We asked them whether the background information was too technical or too broad, and we gave them the opportunity to speak freely about what types of results they would like to see. And in response to that feedback, users told us what they wanted to see, what they would find more useful, and what pieces of information could be de-emphasized. And most of the features on the TCP tool were actually generated based on this user feedback. For example, the first prototype of the website didn't include state-level results at all, but users emphasized that this was a major shortcoming of the tool since most decisions are made at the state level. We also made the graphs more interactive so that a user can hover over the chart and view year-to-year results. We added results like the number of deaths avoided and life years gained, also in response to feedback. And we added those features like the guided tour, hover over functionality, and the getting started features to reduce confusion about the parameter inputs and how to use the tool. Our next steps include organizing a public webinar. We have an upcoming webinar through NCI's Research to Reality series that's going to take place September 26th. And during that webinar, we're going to introduce the tool to the public and disseminate it more widely. We're also in the process of publishing a technical manuscript to accompany the website, where we describe the modeling methods in much greater detail than what's currently available on the site. We'll also be doing some troubleshooting to identify and resolve any other minor glitches on the tool. We'll continue to, for future work, we'll continue to refine the modeling process, and we're working on improving how we model policies for different states. Further down the road, we might consider modeling other types of tobacco policies and even other tobacco products beyond what we've covered so far, but we do this through other mechanisms outside of SysNet. At this point, we invite you to ask us questions and also to explore the site yourself. You can type your question directly into Adobe Connect, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute your microphone. The site is now accessible to you and the public at www.tobaccopolicyeffects.org. And again, we'll be presenting this, the TCP tool to the public through NCI's Research to Reality webinar series on September 26th at 2 p.m.